Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology's Wednesday Spotlight. I'm Scott in South Florida. There's Dan in Eastern Missouri. There's Bob up in Western Missouri. And today we're going to discuss an album that's an old favorite of all three of ours. It's the Chicago Transit Authority. It was released in April of 1969. It was the first album by the band later known as Chicago. At this time, the band was called the Chicago Transit Authority, but because of a lawsuit with the municipal Chicago Transit Authority in the city, they changed their name to just Chicago by the time they released their second album in the following year, in 1970. But the Chicago Transit Authority generated a couple of hit singles, Questions 67 and 68, Beginnings, and Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is? The odd thing about these hit singles is that these hit singles, even though they were released about the same time as the album were, they didn't actually become hits until more than a year later after the second album came out. So these singles became belated hits. But anyway, we're going to give you our impressions and our memories of the album, The Chicago Transit Authority. And Dee, take it away, buddy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and geezers around the country. Another retrospective look back at a great Midwestern band, Chicago. And yeah, the Chicago Transit Authority album, which I bought it a couple years after it was out. And I just think, and for a debut, this was a double album. And I just think this was just, it showed off their musical muscle. You know, Chicago at that time when they burst on the scene, there wasn't too many other rock and roll bands using horns. Now there were a few that, I mean, of course, the Beatles incorporated some brass in their songs, and there were groups like Sly and the Family Stone. But I think Chicago, and of course, people will mention Blood, Sweat, and Tears, but Chicago, they came out with a unique sound, and they blended classic rock and roll with a traditional horn section. And I believe all the original members of Chicago met in college. A few of them were music majors. Anyway, the first song I heard from this album was Beginnings, which I thought was a great tune. And I believe the vocal was by Robert Lamb. And it showed off their lyrical abilities. But the one that really struck me when I first got this was, you know, the introduction. It went right into some serious, you know, horn arrangements. Some were melodious and some were a little bit atonal. But yeah, this particular album, Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is? Question 67 and 68, which is of those big three flagship songs, that's my favorite, because I think it showed off Peter Cetera's voice, and it had lyrics that I think were particularly just enough, not mysterious, but they struck a nerve with me anyway. And then, you know, talking about the double album, and of course, when they recorded this, there was a lot of unrest in the country, late 60s, Vietnam War and all that. There is a part, you know, where they dedicated a lot to political revolutionary positions. However, one of the other songs that were not political, and one of my favorites was Poem 58. And it's a little bit, you know, at first you think, oh, this is a little bit, are they out of tune? But no, I just really like that arrangement to it because it had a little bit of foreboding sounds in it. Some of the other tunes in there, Freeform Guitar, if you love freeform guitar, Terry Kath shows off his chops in this, as he does in does any question 67 and 68? And somewhere I read, and this can't be verified, Jimi Hendrix said that Terry Kath, when he heard the first that he was one of his favorite guitarists. But Terry Kath, I think, looking back, has been given a lot of credits for his contributions to Chicago. But this album at the time, I think you could say it was maybe not a game changer, but they staked out new territory. And a lot of bands, I think, after that started incorporating more and more. But I listened to this about, of course, the other day, and then a few years ago, and I still can listen to it again. I think there's these songs, some of the songs are timeless. Does anybody really know what time it is? Beginnings. And I think this was a big statement by them, and their record company, Columbia, definitely believed in them. And, they're still around today. But
in some
I think
form.
in some form. Yeah, I mean, they lost their drummer, their bass player, the guitar player. I think the horn section is still intact.
The horn section's still intact, and Lamb is still there.
So, and I've seen them twice in concert. Once back about 1970 with yours truly, who's our host, and they played. There was no opening act. They played 2 long sets, and I thought they were just a tremendous concert. I mean, what you heard on the record is how they played, and it was a memorable concert for me.
Wow.
So that,
let's go.
Oh, that's my summation. Well, there it is.
There's my copy of the album. Bought decades and decades ago, and it's a survivor. Something I hadn't listened to, in a long time. So I did a road trip a few days ago. So I listened to the entirety of the thing streaming, while I was traveling down the highway. And it brought back a lot of memories, especially the more well-known songs. I'm a Man, question 67, 68, all the ones that were mentioned previously. And I remember back in the day, you couldn't turn on a radio without hearing that stuff. Anyway, so they were all over the place back then. But I had forgotten about some of the other stuff, on this album, and how different and how much variety there was in their music. And 3 lead vocalists, so you had the different vocal styles. But, if you tuned into this album expecting those radio-friendly songs, you got to see the other side of Chicago, the hard rock side, And, Dan mentioned the freeform guitar. Terry Kath did that without any pedals or sound effects. That's just him, a guitar, and an amp creating all of that. So brought back a lot of great memories about how good these guys were. And, the political side that they had. And it even caused me to pull out my Carnegie Hall album and a few minutes ago, and I went through I still have all the posters and everything that came with that album and the voter guide that they had in '72. So, they, not only did they have those radio-friendly stuff, but they were very political. They had some great hard rock stuff in there. Terry Kath was just an exceptional guitarist. And, Dan mentioned Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I don't think Blood, Sweat, and Tears were a totally different band. I mean, they were short AM radio type stuff. Chicago, I think, was much more experimental, much more progressive. So both horn bands, but, they really went in 2 different directions. So a lot of what they did still stands up well. Some of the political side is obviously dated by now, but the blending of the horns, the vocalists, the guitar work still stands up really well today, in my opinion. And it's just like, listening to the thing in its entirety was coming back to an old friend. And so really enjoyed going back down memory lane. And Dan mentioned that thing about Hendrix. According to my research, Chicago early on opened for Hendrix, and Hendrix supposedly made a comment, and it was recorded in a book somewhere. His quote was, "Your horn section is like one set of lungs, and your guitar player is better than me." So, you can't get a much better recommendation than that. So, anyway, that's my take on listening to an old friend.
Yeah, this album, it's this album to me is one I've been buying and listening to rock albums for more than 50 years, and in that time there aren't too many. You can count on one hand the number of albums that I've heard in that time that is better than this. In my opinion, every time I listen to this album, I think, my God, this is the best thing I've ever heard. And you go track by track with a couple of exceptions, but there are 12 tracks on this album. 9 of them anyway. When one track comes on, I go, "Oh, this is the best Chicago song ever," and then the next one comes. And they say, "Oh no, this is the best Chicago track ever," and then the next one comes. This album is just fabulous. One of the best. I think it's very underrated. This is the album. I think probably this is the album where Terry Kath got his reputation because his aggressive, fuzzy guitar leads are all over the place here. And his guitar is just as prominent, if not more prominent, than that just really tight horn section that this is probably a little more well known for. At least it was more well known for at the time because it was just so different than anything else that had come out. Kath. I mean, Kath was never a prolific songwriter. He only writes 2 tunes out of these 12. And on this one, he sings lead vocal on 2 of them, of the 12. Chicago 2 and on Further Down is when he started singing more in later albums. He doesn't sing too much here, but his guitar playing is all over this thing. That said, this is a double album as a debut, as Dee mentioned. And this wasn't necessarily because Columbia Records had faith in them. How that came about, the way I understand it, is that Blood, Sweat, and Tears happened a few months before this, and James William Guercio was a staff producer for Columbia Records, and he actually discovered Chicago. Before they were known as the Chicago Transit Authority, they were actually called The Big Thing. Which was in playing around Chicago. They eventually moved out to Los Angeles and got into the Los Angeles music scene out there. But anyway, the band was a James William Guercio discovery, and he signed them to the contract. And he wanted to do a double album, and Columbia Records said, no, we're not going to put out that kind of money to do a double album on this unknown band. So Guercio made a deal with them. Columbia Records had signed Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And they wanted Guercio to produce Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And Guercio made a deal with Columbia Records. Okay, I'll produce Blood, Sweat, and Tears if you let me record a double album with my band, Chicago Transit Authority. And so they made a deal with Chicago Transit Authority, but part of that deal was that Guercio had to pay for whatever it cost him above and beyond if they just made a single album. So he took the funds that he got from producing Blood, Sweat, and Tears and put those funds toward this double album by the Chicago Transit Authority, and it turned out to be a correct decision on his part. A lot of a lot of things that a lot of criticism that you always hear about double albums is that, well, okay, it was a pretty good album, but if you would edit it down into a single album, it would be a great single album. To that end, I still, a few months ago, Bob and I did our Desert Island disc thing where we picked 3 Desert Island discs and 2 finalists for that. I did not have this album on that, and every time I listen to this album since then, I kick myself for not for not putting this in one of my final 5. The reason I didn't, and I still think of that when I think of this album, the reason I don't is that this is not a perfect 5-star faultless album. This is not that. I think they could have edited it. There's too much good stuff here to edit this down to a single album. That wouldn't have worked. Too much really good stuff would have been wasted. But it would have been a good 3-sided album. I think the total time is 76 minutes, and I count up 3 tracks at 6.5, 7.5, 11.5, well, about 11.5 minutes for 3 tracks that I think could have been excised that are basically just filler. And that would have been, about a 62-minute album, which is basically 3 sides. The freeform guitar, it's not a tune, it's not a song, it's 6.5 minutes of Kath in the studio plugging his guitar directly into studio amplifiers and just making noise. I mean, there's no tune, there's no structure to this. And this is at a time, I mean, this hadn't been done. A lot of people say that was sort of the forerunner of what became known later as noise rock, that this kind of influenced that movement. Okay, I get it, but as a 6.5-minute track on a double album, I wish it wasn't there. Whenever I go through this album, I just want to skip over that. And then all the political stuff that they do is pretty much, that's side 4 of this album. Is the entire side is a political statement by them. It starts off with the tapes from the Chicago Democratic convention where the protesters are outside chanting, "The whole world is watching, the whole world is watching." They do that for about a minute to start the side, and then there's the second track on side 4 is called "Someday," which was written by trombone player James Pankow and Robert Lamb. It's called "Someday," and in parentheses, August 29th, 1968, which was the date of that Democratic convention where they got the tape of the protesters. And that song is okay. It's just there as a political statement. It's not there as a fantastic piece of music. But then the rest of the side is a 14-minute and 38-second track called "Liberation," written by James Pankow, the trombone player, which is essentially a 11-minute Terry Kath guitar solo, and it's just absolutely great. I love this track. I love this thing. I'm not usually so much for jam tracks and long 11-minute instrumental jam tracks, but this is an exception. I love that track. But those first 2, if they would have gotten rid of that, if they would have gotten rid of freeform guitar, this would have been a great 3 sides album, I think. One of the best covers that I have ever heard by anybody is on this album. It closes out side 3, 7.5 minutes. "I'm a Man," which is a song by Traffic, written by Steve Winwood. The Chicago Transit Authority made it a Chicago Transit Authority song. After this, it was no longer a Traffic song. It was a Chicago Transit Authority song. And it's just the four rock musicians: Lamb on keyboards, Kath on guitar, Peter Cetera on bass, and Danny Serafin on drums, and then the three horn players. They don't use their horns here. They just grab percussion instruments, and this is just a really heavy percussion based track, and it's fantastic. Poem 58, which closes side 2, opens with about a 4-minute Terry Kath guitar workout, which is fabulous. Side 1, beginnings, and does anybody really know what time it is? Or both of those were edited down into hit singles. Both of them Robert Lamb tunes, and both of them fabulous stuff. It opens with Terry Kath's song "Introduction," which is really an introduction to this band. That's what the song is all about. It's Terry Kath singing about what the band is all about, right? Sit back and let us play. Sit back and let us play. What does that line go? Just sit back and enjoy listening to us is basically what the message is there. This album is great. I can't say enough good things about this. With some flaws, with those flaws that I mentioned. As I guess Bob and Dee do not agree with me that Freeform Guitar is just a throwaway album filler. That's why I've always considered it that, but both those guys seem to appreciate it more than I do. But this is great. The second album that came out in 1970 was their first big hit single was "Make Me Smile," which was part of a suite of songs that's on the second album. And that was really my first introduction to Chicago, was that hit single "Make Me Smile." And then it was after I heard that, a buddy of ours that Dee and I grew up with bought that album, and I heard that album and I really enjoyed it. So it's like, well, okay, since this is the second one I've already heard this, so I went out and bought the Chicago Transit Authority to listen to it, and I'm so glad I did. It's been one of my favorites for 50 years, give or take a few months in there, and I will never waver off of that. Again, like I say, I kick myself when I think that I didn't put it on my Desert Island disc list. But I really didn't, because of those 2 or 3 problems that I mentioned before. This is just fabulous stuff, and it pains me that there's a generation, 2 or 3 generations of people who know Chicago as this ballad band from the mid '80s. They all of a sudden they became just a ballad pop band in the mid '80s, like others did, like Genesis did, and others. And I know you watch a lot of these reaction videos on YouTube where some of these younger kids, I call them, they're younger adults, I guess they are. They'll do the reaction videos, and they'll on a suggestion from somebody, they'll go back and listen to "I'm a Man" or react to a couple things off the second Chicago album, and they're just blown away. They had no idea that this is the same band. They were expecting nice little cheesy little ballads, which is what they became known for, and they weren't that at all. Peter Cetera was sort of the face of that. When all of a sudden he became during the MTV years, he became the pretty face and the nice voice that they started building their sound around, and became this sweet pop band. If you come back and listen to this album, not only is this a fabulous introduction to Terry Kath and his guitar, and why he was known for a lot of years as one of the most underrated guitarists ever. But I don't think he's one of the most underrated guitarists ever anymore, because in the last few years, people have rediscovered him and have come to that. But I think what's undiscovered here, and what a lot of people don't realize, is that Peter Cetera is a hell of a bass player.
Yes,
indeed. There's just fantastic bass lines throughout this record. And Cetera had a nice voice. He had a good rock and roll voice that he uses to good effect on this album and a couple of subsequent albums. So so that's another reason for all you folks, if you only know Chicago from the 1980s on, if you want to discover something new, go listen to Peter Cetera in the early days. The guy was a hell of a rock bassist and a hell of a rock singer. He was wonderful. I can't say enough good things about it. Just to give you some statistics, this album was on the Billboard 200 for 171 weeks. This was more than 3 years that this album had a presence on Billboard 200. It never sold a lot of records. I mean, it never became this big giant record that came out. Understand, this was at a time when we were transitioning from top 40 radio to FM album-oriented radio, and the FM stations kind of picked up on this stuff, but they couldn't get their singles played on top 40 because it was just too out there. It wasn't the standard kind of pop songs that you hear on top 40 radio, right? And so they never did get there until later. And then all of a sudden, you know, when "Make Me Smile" it was a nice top 40 rock song that got released after the second album, and then top 40 in the mainstream kind of caught up to this one. But this album was on the Billboard 200 for more than 3 years. And just to tell you, it was released in April of 1969, as I said. And in 1970, the following year, the year-end charts in 1970, the best-selling albums of 1970, Chicago Transit Authority was number 23. It gets better. In 1971, the year-end charts, 2 years later, more than 2 years later after this was released, the year-end Billboard 200 charts, this one was number 15. I mean, this is an album that had some legs, right? But so many people came onto it like I did after they heard the Chicago 2. Chicago 2 was a big one. That was our big selling album. That was our big mainstream breakthrough. But people kept going back and discovering this after Chicago 2, and it hung around for a long time. Like I say, there aren't too many albums that I've ever heard that are much better than this, from beginning to end. You know, with a couple of little problems here and there, but from beginning to end, this thing just one track to another. One track is better than the track that came before, and it just keeps going like that. Great album.
I need to echo Scott's comments. If you know Chicago from their 80s pop ballad stuff, and sadly that was when they had their greatest commercial success, you really don't know the roots of Chicago, and you need to check this out because it's a different Chicago, and I think it will amaze you. This is a vibrant album. It's exciting. Yeah, I kind of agree with Scott a little bit. There is some filler on there. The freeform guitar, while I'm impressed with what he did, it does drag on some, but it's an exciting album, and I think it will open your eyes up to what these guys were doing there at the beginning. So definitely go back and check this out if the only Chicago you know is the pop Chicago. You definitely need to listen to this.
Yeah, definitely. It's a completely different world. And this is a world that I enjoy living in.
I think when they did cut down, does anybody really know what time it is, to singles, that those are still, as Bob said, those are, leg pumping, exciting songs you can, play on the radio in your car as you go down the road. And I just think they had it. And they were at the forefront, I believe, of the marriage of the brass and traditional rock and roll. There was a few other groups out there, maybe Tower of Power, but they never reached the level of Chicago's.
They were rock bands. This was a rock band that used a horn section. You know, all the other one, I mean, they were, you know, they were kind of jazz fusion, or, you know, Blood, Sweat, Tears was more jazz. A few of them were more soul bands than rock, but this was the rock group that used horns effectively as a major component of their sound. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
other rock bands use like horn lines on albums or stuff, but just more as like accents. They weren't a major component of what they were doing. You know, they would just hire studio musicians and play a couple of horns as an accent more than a major component.
Yeah, if I can throw in, if you want to see what this group really looked like live, there's a video on YouTube, Terry Kath doing lead vocals on 25 or 624. That's just a dynamite video to watch. He does an incredible performance.
Yeah, there's a video that's probably pulled from the Tanglewood.
Tanglewood, yes, it is.
Yeah, that whole that entire concert is on YouTube somewhere. You can dig it up. Which is, I think that was after their second album. That was after Chicago 2, because they do the if I remember, well, 25 or 64 was on the second album, and Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan was also, I remember they did that, which is where Make Me Smile and Color My World came from. Okay, gang. Thanks for having this discussion about this album with me. Again, one of my favorites of all time. Definitely in my top 5 or 6. It doesn't go as low as 10. It's right around 5 or 6. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks for listening, everybody. Come back and join us next week when we'll have something else really fabulous for you. Thanks for listening, everybody. So long.
Thank you.
Thank you.